introduce a couple wonderful and amazing people to you. To my furthest left, we have Dr. Julia Sobol, who is an anesthesiologist at the Columbia University Medical Center, where she's also an assistant professor. And both of these women have worked with Doctors Without Borders, also called MSF. And her first assignment with MSF was in the maternal health care program in Jahun, Nigeria. And then we have Sarah Bou-Rhodes, who began her work with Doctors Without Borders in 2012, and she served as an administrator in refugee camps in South Sudan and in a hospital in southern Afghanistan. And she's currently a career manager with MSF, where she places staff around the world. And she also has firsthand experience working in the DRC and also in Iraq. So, welcome. So, Sarah, this is your second time seeing the play, and Julia, this is your first time seeing the play. Can you just let us know just your first thoughts and ideas and what resonated with you this evening?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, it was my second time, and I felt really lucky to be able to come back and sort of have a bit of time to process everything that goes on in the play, and especially Eve's performance. And I remember after seeing the first one, I went back to look online at the calendar, and I mean, if you see how many performances she has, it's incredible once you see the high energy that is in every single performance. And the second one was exactly the same thing, and it made me realize I felt like I could appreciate so much more the intricate details that she captures in her storytelling of her personal life, of her personal story, that just brings this essence of the journey that she traveled in fighting cancer, and if her work in Bukavu. It made me think a lot about how Doctors Without Borders, I don't know if you guys know, the organization was founded in part by a bunch of doctors who used to work with the Red Cross, and they were frustrated at the time of the 70s by the lack of speaking out against the context in which the Red Cross was working. The Red Cross maintained a more silent position in order to have diplomatic neutrality. And they were very frustrated with the stance, and so they ended up forming they formed MSF with some journalists. And one of the main differences with the Red Cross is that MSF has a stance of bearing witness, or témoignage. And the whole idea is being able to share the stories of the people that we are working with when sometimes other people can't because they can't access it or they won't for political or diplomatic reasons. And I just thought, how powerful would it be, to have the level of detail and depth and humanity and warmth of Eve's story with all the people that we're working with. I mean, it's incredible what she was able to do here, and it really made me, reflect on what a talented storyteller she was.
It's amazing how effective telling personal stories is in communicating the larger ideas of what MSF does, right? How about for you, Julia?
I think in terms of the show, I really liked how Eve wove her own personal kind of journey with that of the population that she was working with in DRC. And then what resonated with me kind of more personally was sort of her interactions with the medical field in general, and her work with women in DRC, because I've sort of had my own experiences with both of those, and it was interesting to see it from a patient's perspective as well.
Oh, that's amazing. And I know one of the things that you've talked about a lot is how to kind of modify training and modify the work that you do when going out into the field to work. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your first experience working with MSF.
Well, I mean, in the States, when you learn medicine, you learn with obviously a lot of, we're a very wealthy country, and we have a lot of gadgets and devices and things you can use to help people, basically. And when you go do work in other places, obviously the equipment is different, but also, culturally everything is different as well. And you have to adapt, and so you can't really, obviously you want to keep the same principles, but you definitely have to adapt to what is available there and what kind of the cultural norms are. And so that is always something that's really difficult when you're doing work in other places, and I'm sure it's the same when you're doing, work for any NGO and not just medicine in general.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder what advice now you give, having had the experience that you had, what's some of the advice that you give to other people who are going into the field for the first time?
Usually I think I would advise people to use the resources there, and I think one of the principles of MSF that I always really liked was this idea. I've been on a bunch of different kinds of medical trips, and there are some where the doctors and the medical professionals bring all of the equipment and personnel and everything there, and kind of take over with their own resources and then leave. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing, or the thing I really liked about MSF, is that they want to make their time there sustainable, and so they don't really want to bring in resources that are going to be gone when the people are gone. So they make a really strong effort to use the resources that are there, and I think that's really important to do. Mm-hmm.
And we had some of you, were any of you here the night that Mama C was here? Yeah, she came and just told wonderful and amazing stories, and she's such a beautiful and charismatic and wonderful, amazing woman. But she was talking a lot about the work that she's been doing there and how she and Eve connected, and also one of the things that she talks a lot about, and one of the things that Eve always emphasizes too, is making sure that the City of Joy itself is really run by the women who are there. So that was something that was really important to them, and they've had over 1,000 women go through the City of Joy to date. So it's pretty incredible. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how you started to work with MSF, because I know you studied conflict studies and peacebuilding as well.
I did. I had started studying the politics of NGOs, and I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be working on this and have firsthand experience. So after college, I ended up working with a small NGO in Haiti. Haiti is nicknamed, unfortunately, the Republic of NGOs, because at one point after the earthquake and cholera happened, it just seemed like every single actor was there on the ground, for better or for worse, trying to do something. The result was that I met a ton of organizations, I met a ton of people who were there, and the most positive feedback that I heard consistently, both from Haitians and from international actors, was that MSF provided the best services, that they were the most consistent, and that they had integrated the best with the local actors. And for me, that was just something that struck me as very powerful when I saw, again, so many other actors coming in and sort of doing their thing, acting very independently. And even MSF struggles with doing this, and oftentimes in very like emergency settings where time is of the essence. You come in, you set up, but then it is a question of how do you continue working with the actors, the institutions on the ground at whatever capacity it is. Yeah.
And I wonder too, in your role now, staffing, maybe particularly in the DRC, what are some of your kind of guiding principles as you're looking for people in, I imagine, a whole range of positions?
Yeah, that's something often that isn't always known about MSF, which is funny and surprising, and I love talking about. Doctors Without Borders, everyone thinks that we're doctors, we're medical professionals, and everyone seems kind of disappointed when I tell them I work in HR. But we hire all kinds of profiles: finance, admin, WATSAN, humanitarian affairs officers, logisticians. Obviously, we would be nothing without the logs that help bring the medicine supplies that we work with. If we need to create an inflatable tent in 24 hours, they're the ones who help us get the materials. So it's been so fascinating working here in New York on sort of the other end of sending people to the field, and then talking with them when they come back, and you see the kind of people who really thrive in this environment are just flexible, willing to work with what comes up, and not focusing on themselves per se, but really seeing how they can improve and work and support the environment that they go into, sort of taking themselves out of the focus.
And do you feel like there's some people on their first journeys that's something that people have a challenge doing?
Absolutely. And I would say I had the same challenge my first time. It's a shock. There's usually for most people it's a change of context, a change of resources. Julia might actually be able to, we were talking about this before, but she talked about her first experience and like how she, as a medic, had prepared for one thing, and then even if no matter how many times you think what you're going to expect, the reality with these contexts.
Yeah, I was telling her when I was going through the application process, I think the things that they kind of look for, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, are people who have traveled in austere environments or kind of, low resource settings, people who have kind of had to work, in those environments and stuff like that. And so when I was interviewing, I was like, oh, I've done a critical care fellowship, I've been on call all the time, like, I have all these patients that die, I'm okay with death, like, I've traveled
work in the
a lot,
ICU.
I work in the ICU. And then I got there, and I was on call 24/7 for 2 months straight. I did not have a day off for 60 days, which was, I had not anticipated would be that hard. And the patients that I had were all really sick, but they were young, and I wasn't really used to that either. Here, in most of our ICUs, the patients tend to be pretty old, and there it was, 16-year-old girls who were dying. And so that was actually emotionally very hard. And yeah, I mean, it's you really have no idea what to expect, although they do a really good job of trying to brief you and tell you what it's going to be like. But each site is also so different. I was at a site, there were 2 sites when I was there in Nigeria. There was one in the south that was mostly trauma, and then the one in the north was maternal health, and they were completely different kind of sites. But
Different resources, different needs, different
kinds of patients.
Yeah. And I wonder, there's a scene in the play where he's talking about just the care and being seen by the doctors. I wonder, in your work as an anesthesiologist, what your sense of what that section of the play is and how you guys deal with engaging patients on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah, I think one of the scenes that I was most affected by in the play was when the doctor was trying to drain her abscess. I thought that was just so brutal and really powerful, and it's something that, as a doctor, you never want to be that doctor, obviously, but at the same time, doctors have constraints, and they have time constraints and limits of patients and patients with a CE. But I think that was really interesting, and it's hard to remember to kind of be that humanistic side when it's very easy to think about a patient in terms of just their problem.
Yeah, and one of the questions we've been asking people throughout, there's been a bunch of conversations after the play, is as we think about kind of rewriting narratives and changing the language used to talk about things or changing the way we think about things, what are different narratives or different language that you think would be helpful in the different work that you do that you feel like would help people grow, progress, move through breaks or conflicts?
It's interesting because I'm going to deviate a bit and then come back to this. Like I was saying before, MSF often works in emergency settings, and they come in and they are, historically work independently and very much at their own pace. And increasingly, for many reasons, we're working in closer collaboration with the Ministry of Health on the ground. And this has just been a very interesting change of pace and language for MSF in terms of reshifting the focus of how we discuss our projects, even internally or publicly. For many reasons, the organization is used to showing itself as not having attachments to any other actors in order to maintain independence and neutrality and not be affected by the conflicts in which we're working. But the reality is that as we can't continue to work in these contexts if there are existing institutions without partnering with them, without strengthening them, and that includes some kind of engagement. So this is this constant tug of war within MSF of, how do we maintain this our identity while also building up the context in which we're working, and also like what you were saying before about empowering individuals in the countries and building agency, not sort of coming in and telling a story, but helping people who are there tell their story because they're there to tell it. It's just if we can provide a voice, if we can provide a stepping stone, a megaphone, that's what we can do.
And what's the reaction been from the ministries of health to that engagement?
Very different. I think there's so many politics and emotions involved. Obviously, the DRC is a great example. It's a huge country, And what I would see in Bukavu often is that the politics in Kinshasa might be different from the ones in South Kivu, because South Kivu is just so far away. It's a day's plane ride away, not a day, but like a day's worth travel. Things are, that it might not be instant communication. There might be differences in communication, so you might have different policies in place.
Well, what was interesting about the site that I was at in Nigeria was that it was actually a joint Ministry of Health site.
Yeah.
Which I know was different than a lot of the other missions that MSF was involved with.
And what's a joint ministry? What's a joint site?
So the way this hospital was set up, it was a Ministry of Health hospital, but MSF had partnered with them and were just doing the maternal health aspect. And so there were other things going on that we were not involved with. There was general surgery, there was pediatrics, there were other wards that we didn't go to, but the only thing that we did was maternal health. And so we did basically women in the peripartum period. And it was actually also a vesicovaginal fistula site. So that was actually its focus. But it was interesting because a lot of the staff actually worked for both the Ministry of Health and MSF. And there was always a little bit of a tension between the two, or a tension between the people who just work for the Ministry of Health and people who work for MSF.
Is that an ownership issue, or is that a difference of philosophy about how things should be done issue?
Mostly resources.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it has to do mostly with pay and kind of qualifications. The sort of motivations, or at least that was the generalization, was that kind of the Ministry of Health workers had less of a motivation to work hard, whereas the MSF workers were more hardworking. But that was, the stereotype.
And what are either the Ministries of Health or MSF doing to kind of bridge that gap or divide? I mean, I'm sure it changes, as you say, within each context, but are there people engaged on the ground to kind of help facilitate that conversation, or do people in each context kind of figure it out on their own?
MSF is actually looking at changing its typical project structure for how it responds to these contexts, especially within hospital contexts, because it's something that has come up increasingly, and it's really challenging because you're basically trying to work in a structure like a hospital, and you'll have two completely separate administrative systems. You'll have two systems of pay, two systems of evaluation, different management styles, different management, everything. And that can be very conflictive. So MSF is trying, we are the ones who are coming in, so we're trying to adapt and see how we can change our standard practices to better suit these scenarios.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. Does anyone have any questions out here? Anything? Yes.
I'm just curious.
And I'll repeat the questions for everybody.
You have an affiliation with a hospital and you participate in this wonderful program. How does one negotiate that with your primary job to be able to take time to do this work?
She just has a question about, because Julia is also a practicing physician, how she negotiates her time between that and MSF.
Yeah, I think, when I worked with MSF, I was sort of between jobs, and that was how I got such a long time off. And I was just saying to Sarah beforehand that I have 4 weeks of vacation a year, and the minimum mission or the minimum time with MSF is 4 weeks. And so it's very hard for me, as selfless as I would like to be, I don't want to give my entire vacation to working. So what ends up happening is, it depends on how flexible people's jobs are. So sometimes I've done 1 week trips that are kind of easier to do, which I still use vacation time for. So I get, a little bit of the service or, helping in under-resourced environments, but I don't have to spend that much time there. Other people have negotiated different things with their jobs. There are other people who are in my field who have, much more vacation a year, and so they have much more flexibility with their schedule. The other thing I noticed at MSF, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but at least at our site, it was sort of a bimodal age distribution, and so it was either kind of really young, just finished training, hadn't really worked very much in some other capacity, and then kind of towards the end, closer to retirement, kind of a new direction that they were going in.
I'd say the American medical system can be a bit more strict, whereas like your European systems often allow doctors to take 6 months on, 6 months off.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How do you deal with security?
The question is, how do they deal with security?
What aspect?
When having an area that has a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I think one of our best proponents for security is the quality of our work. The people, I mean, the services that we're providing make the people want us to be there. So we work in insecure contexts. There's often issues of theft. And many times, you know, if something goes missing, it'll be our staff that help us get it back. Or, you know, if we've been robbed successively, like which happened in one of our projects in the DRC, it's the staff that find out what's going on and help us put an end to it so that we don't have to leave.
I think the organization itself is really careful about security, and I would say probably 50% of the information days had to do with security, both personal security, political security, because obviously that's everyone's biggest concern. What people get concerned about, I feel like, are kind of the things that don't happen very often, like kidnapping and that kind of thing. And what's more likely to happen are things that could happen here, like car accidents or sickness like viruses or malaria or something like that. And so I think they take different precautions for those. But when I was in Nigeria, towards the end of my time there, they had elections, and that led to a lot of election violence. Not to us, but amongst the population that we were in. And so a lot of our national staff were a lot of them wanted to leave. They wanted to go to their family. They were worried for their own lives. And so we had all these policies put into place. We met every night to talk about security briefings. We had been able to walk to and from the hospital, and then we weren't allowed to walk anymore. We had to take cars. And so they were really careful. But I think MSF's big thing is that they are neutral. And so they will treat all sides in a conflict, and they also have no guns and no real locks on any facilities. And so at our base, we had security guards, but they didn't have guns, and there also was no like chains on the door or anything like that. But I think that also promotes kind of trust amongst the community.
Did you ever take nurses from this country? Forgive me if you answered this already.
You're just wondering if MSF ever takes nurses from this country.
We do.
Yeah, the site that I was at had 10 expats and about 200 national staff. And out of the expats, only 2 of us were doctors, and probably 6 were nurses. We had midwives, we had OR nurses, outreach nurses. I would say it was actually mostly nurses. And then there were the logs and HR.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
How did you personally deal with the magnitude of, you know, the horrors that you, in the situations you go into?
I'm just wondering about how, I guess, emotionally, psychologically, people are how you prepare and deal with the traumas and conflicts that are going around you.
For me, at my site, we had a really good group of people, and you live with these people. You see them at every meal. You work together and see each other every day and night. And so we talked about a lot of stuff. I kept in touch with people from home. I had friends who had worked with Doctors Without Borders before. But a lot of it you can't really dwell on because you have something to do like the next minute. So there's a little bit of compartmentalization, and kind of you'll deal with it later. But I think just talking about it really helps a lot.
And MSF also has psychosocial support services that are available to everyone who goes to the field before and after. But I do agree with Julia that it can be really challenging to deal with that. And there's unfortunately this aspect of desensitization that you just hear things more frequently than you would outside in different contexts. And it takes time to readjust from that and to that.
And just to let you guys know, the show is running for, I think, another 2 weeks or so. And there's about maybe 5 or 6 more conversations before the end of that. The conversations, the Beyond the Stage conversations, are sponsored by Jan Warner in memory of her husband, Arthur Warner. And even if you don't come and see the show again, but you check out the website and there's a conversation you want to attend, you're more than welcome to just stop by the theater after the show and come by for any of the remaining conversations. There's a really wonderful one coming up, I think, on Thursday. There's another one coming up on Saturday that's going to be with Kim Crenshaw and I think some women from whose daughters have been killed by police violence. So they're all going to be there. We're going to be having a conversation then. But check out the schedule on the MTC website. Also, if you get the chance, please do visit the City of Joy website. And there's going to be a documentary coming out about the City of Joy soon, so you can find out more information about then. And I just want to thank Julia and Sarah for being with us today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great night.